Hidden beneath the towering domes and sweeping courtyards of the Grand Palace stands a financial vault housing the financial lifeblood of an empire, Treasury, stretching across 3 continents. Tonight we enter the year 1526, joining the chief treasurer on a silent midnight vigil to audit the immense spoils of recent Western conquests. It is a slow, methodical quiet of immense wealth, where every clinking coin and scratching quill measures the weight of human ambition met of human ambition. Hey friend, settle into the warmth of your bed and adjust your pillow until your neck feels completely supported. Pull your heavy blanket up over your shoulders and allow your breathing to slow down, matching the quiet rhythm of the late hour. You have done enough for today. Let the muscles in your jaw relax and let your eyes close heavily against the dark. The night air wrapping around the palace is incredibly still, holding the sharp, damp chill of the nearby sea strait. We are walking through the deepest inner courtyard of the Sultanate, where even the wind seems to hush its voice out of respect for the sleeping monarch. The shadows cast by the high stone walls stretch long and deep across the marble paving stones. Beside you walks the chief of the Treasury, a man whose entire life is bound to the meticulous counting of royal fortunes. His footsteps fall in a steady, reassuring cadence, a low thud of thick leather against cold stone. He carries a heavy ring of forged iron keys. Each key is thick and black, polished smooth by decades of handling. They clink together with a dull, deep metallic chime as he walks. The sound is not sharp or jarring, but deeply rhythmic, like a slow metronome guiding us toward the vault. The air smells intensely of cold, granite-wet earth, and the sharp, fragrant pine pitch burning in the heavy iron braziers along the guard path. The flickering golden light from the flames dances softly across the smooth surface of the stones, creating a mesmerizing pattern of light and shadow that lulls the tired mind into a state of absolute calm. We pass the silent sentries, standing like statues carved from the night itself. Their heavy woven wool coats absorb the sound of our passing, ensuring the perfect silence of the inner sanctum remains completely undisturbed. The dampness of the night clings to your skin, but the thick layers of your garments that makes the cold air feel enveloping warmth, the cold air feel incredibly refreshing in your lungs. Every slow inhalation brings a profound sense of peace, and every gentle exhalation releases the heavy tension accumulated from the waking world. We are approaching the great double doors of the Treasury building. The wood is ancient oak, black with age and reinforced with thick, heavy bands of forged iron that have slowly oxidized into a dark, muted brown over countless winters. The sheer imposing size of the doors commands an absolute quiet reverence from anyone who stands before them. As we stand before these ancient doors, remember that this is a work of creative historical narrative constructed solely for entertainment, relaxation, and educational purposes. While firmly rooted in verified archives, certain scenes and atmospheres have been textually reimagined to provide you with a truly immersive auditory experience. The chief treasurer stands perfectly still before the towering oak doors. He takes a long, slow breath of the midnight air. The damp wind from the Bosphorus strait sweeps gently over the high stone walls of the palace. It carries the faint, calming smell of salt, deep, dark water and the wet soil of the surrounding gardens. The breeze catches the heavy, dark wool of his long cloak. The fabric is remarkably thick and densely woven, crafted carefully by the finest weavers in the city to keep the biting winter chill completely at bay. You can hear the soft brushing sound as the heavy wool folds against itself in the wind. It is a slow, comforting rustle that deeply resembles the sound of a thick, heavy blanket being pulled up around your own shoulders. The cold night air barely touches your cheeks, leaving your core completely warm, safe, and heavily anchored to the ground beneath you. The marble paving stones beneath your feet are worn completely smooth by the countless footsteps of guards and officials over the passing decades. The faint golden light from the single brass lantern reflects softly on the slick damp surface of the ancient stones. The light creates small pools of amber warmth in the vast ocean of darkness. You can see the tiny droplets of mist suspended in the air glowing briefly as they drift through the deep shadows. Before vanishing back into the deep shadows, the entire courtyard feels like a secret hidden world entirely separated from the noise and movement outside the fortress city, the fortress walls. The immense quiet of this inner sanctuary is deeply intentional. It was designed to isolate the royal wealth from the chaos of the outside world, creating a perfect vacuum of silence and order. Far beyond these heavy stone walls, the dark waters of the Bosphorus flow steadily between the two great continents. You cannot see the water from here, but you can feel its heavy presence in the dampness of the air and the low distant hum of the wind. The sea moves continuously with a slow, powerful rhythm that mirrors the slow, continuous breathing of your own resting body. Every inhale draws in the quiet strength of the ancient stone, and every exhale releases the lingering tension of the waking day. The treasurer closes his eyes for a brief moment, completely surrendering to the vast, peaceful rhythm of the night. He is a man of absolute quiet discipline, whose entire existence is defined by careful observation and unbroken calm. His weathered hands emerge from the deep warm folds of his dark woolen sleeves. His skin is lined ver kept at age, but his movements are incredibly steady and deliberate. He holds the lantern slightly higher, allowing the golden light to wash over the massive iron bands reinforcing the oak doors. The iron is cold and completely unyielding. It has stood as a silent guardian for generations, absorbing the harsh winter storms and the scorching summer heat with the exact same stoic indifference. The absolute permanence of the iron and stone provides a deep grounding comfort. It reminds you that the small fleeting worries of the day are completely insignificant in the face of such enduring strength. You can simply let go of everything and allow the heavy stillness of the fortress to hold you securely in the dark. He shifts his weight slightly on the smooth stones, and the heavy iron keys resting against his hip clink together once more. The sound is a soft, muted chime that travels only a few feet before being completely swallowed by the damp night air. He reaches down with slow, intentional grace to lift the key ring. The cold, heavy metal settles into the palm of his bare hand. We will wait here for just a moment longer, standing in the peaceful dark before the grand doors, letting the cold sea breeze vekepa it hat over us, and feeling the solid, immovable earth beneath our feet. The treasurer turns his attention away from the vast darkness of the open courtyard and begins his slow, methodical approach toward the heavy iron locks. Flanking the massive double doors are two elite guards of the Royal Janissary Corps standing so perfectly still they seem to be carved directly from the deep shadows of the stone archway. They wear thick, heavy woolen coats of deep indigo and tall white felt headdresses that absorb the faint amber light of the lantern, completely muting any reflection. You cannot see their eyes hidden deeply as they are beneath the heavy folds of their winter collars and the wide brim, not of their headwear. Yet you can easily sense their quiet, imposing presence, deeply anchored to the stone paving beneath them, like ancient, deep-rooted trees weathering a long winter night. Their absolute stillness is profoundly comforting to witness. It is the profound stillness of men who have entirely mastered the delicate art of waiting, who deeply understand that true strength lies in perfect quiet discipline. If you listen very closely beneath the soft rustle of the night wind, you can hear the slow, steady rhythm of their breathing beneath the thick, heavy layers of their winter garments. It is a low, continuous rise and fall that harmonizes beautifully with the distant sound of the Bosphorus sea breeze. Inhale and exhale. The guards breathe together in a shared silent cadence, an unspoken rhythm that governs the entire sleeping palace. You might find yourself naturally matching their slow, steady rhythm, letting your own chest rise and fall with the exact same measured, peaceful weight. The faint, comforting smell of heavily oiled leather and cold, polished steel wafts from their thick, clean, woody scent of the pine pitch burning slowly in the nearby iron braziers. Their long ceremonial halberds rest completely motionless against the smooth granite wall. The highly polished steel blades catch a single fragile glint of warm golden light from the treasurer S. Swinging dark, holding the reflection perfectly steady in the surrounding dark. There is absolutely no threat here tonight, no sudden movements. There is only the supreme, unbroken peace of the inner courtyard, deeply guarded and entirely secure. You are completely protected in this ancient enclosed space, entirely shielded by the impenetrable stone walls and the loyal silent watchers of the night. As we linger in this safe and quiet space, Mort invite you to let your shoulders sink even deeper into your mattress. If you find peace in wandering slowly through these forgotten midnights of history, you might consider subscribing to our channel. We can take many more of these slow, restful journeys together, exploring the gentle, silent corners of the past, while the noisy modern world hurries on without us. Just let the thought drift away as softly as the damp sea mist rolling heavily over the high palace walls. The chief treasurer steps deliberately between the two, silent acknowledging their loyal presence with only the faintest fractional nod of his hooded head. The guards do not move a single muscle in response, but the subtle shift in the cold air between them silently acknowledges his rite of passage. He now stands directly against the broad face of the great oak door. The heavy timber is rough, deeply textured, and completely cold to the touch. He reaches out with one bare hand to gently press his dry palm against the ancient wood. It is a quiet personal gesture of respect, a completely silent greeting to the sleeping fortress. Before he breaks its midnight seal, the dark wood grain feels entirely solid and completely immovable beneath his sensitive fingertip in its deep, dense fibers. The cold, damp night wraps heavily around the three figures standing before the vault, holding them all together in a perfect, timeless, peaceful suspension. The master of the treasury raises his right hand, bringing the heavy iron key ring slowly into the warm pool of amber light cast by his brass lantern. The faint glow reveals the deep, rich darkness of the forged metal. There are several massive keys secured together on a thick iron loop. Each individual piece is a unique, heavy masterpiece crafted by the ancient metal workers of the city. The keys are incredibly dark and intensely cold to the touch, having absorbed the damp, freezing chill of the sea wind. For metal is long, silent hours. The metal is incredibly dense. When he shifts his steady grip, the thick iron shafts slide heavily against one another, producing a low, deep, muted clanking sound. This sound is not sharp. It does not ring or echo brightly. It is simply a dull, heavy thud of pure solid mass, encountering another solid mass in the dead of night. It is an incredibly grounding sound, deeply reassuring in its heavy simplicity. It anchors the wandering, tired mind firmly, to the physical weight of the present moment. Listen to the slow, deep clink of the heavy iron. Let that heavy sound pull your shoulders down softly into the warm mattress below you. Imagine the cold, heavy pressure of that iron, resting safely in the palm of your own hand. It is a solid, comforting weight, a reliable anchor that prevents you from drifting into anxious thoughts. There is absolutely nothing fragile or delicate in this quiet space. Everything here is built for absolute permanence, designed entirely to withstand the longest and darkest of winters. If you look very closely at the surface of the primary vault key, under the deep subtle lantern light, you can clearly see the deep subtle texture of its long history. The wide rounded top of the key, where generations of silent keepers have placed their strong thumbs, is worn completely smooth. It is polished to a dull dark shine by the natural oils of human hands, passing the heavy responsibility down through the slow turning of centuries. The rest of the key retains the rough, porous texture of ancient raw-forged iron. It carries tiny invisible valleys and microscopic ridges that hold the faint dry smell of old stone-cold dust and the deep, quiet earth from which the ore was originally mined. The stem of the main key is thicker than the thumb of a strong man. It is incredibly rigid, completely unyielding, and flawlessly straight. The complex asymmetrical teeth at the bottom edge are cut deep and incredibly precise to perfectly align with the massive internal levers of the hidden locking mechanism resting silently, inside the thick oak door. He holds these heavy keys with a quiet, careful reverence, acknowledging their immense silent power. The sheer physical weight of the iron ring requires a deliberate and very steady grip. His knuckles are slightly pale against the dark, cold metal, but his hand does not tremble in the slightest. As he slowly selects the correct key for the outer lock, the thick metal loop turns smoothly. Iron scrapes slowly against iron with a long, continuous rasping whisper. The low sound travels gently through the damp night air, wrapping around the smsims marble pillars and echoing very softly against the high stone walls before fading lessways entirely into the vast ocean of silence that blankets the sleeping royal palace. The two guards remain absolutely perfectly still, breathing slowly in the dark, entirely undisturbed by the heavy sound perfectly chime. They know this sound perfectly well. It is the slow, familiar rhythm of the long night. Watch the gentle, reassuring heartbeat of the sleeping Treasury. He finally isolates the largest key, separating it carefully from the heavy hanging cluster. He adjusts his grip firmly on the smooth, cold, rounded top. The freezing iron presses deeply against the warm skin of his palm, creating a sharp, perfectly grounded in the dark, quiet reality of the courtyard. He takes one more slow, deep breath of the wet, salty sea air, letting his chest fall black key slowly toward the dark iron faceplate of the great vault door of the great vault. The night waits perfectly still, completely quiet, entirely ready for the heavy, deliberate turn of the ancient lock. Everything is slow. Everything is peaceful. You are completely safe here in the heavy dark. The master treasurer guides the long, heavy iron key toward the small, dark opening in the forged metal faceplate. The surface of the lock is coated in a very thin layer of heavy animal oil, applied meticulously to protect the ancient iron from the constant dampness of the salty sea air. The oil smells deeply of the earth, thick and slightly sweet, completely blending with the sharp, clean scent of raw, cold metal. He aligns the complex asymmetrical teeth of the key with the narrow vertical slot. With a slow, gentle push, he slides the thick, heavy shaft into the deep, dark void. The quiet sound of the key entering the ancient lock is incredibly satisfying. It is a slow, continuous scrape of cold iron, sliding perfectly against cold iron. The fit is flawlessly tight, carefully engineered by the master blacksmiths of the royal court. There is absolutely no loose rattling and no empty space. The heavy metal pieces slide together with a deep resonant friction that speaks of absolute security and masterful craftsmanship. The key travels deeply into the heart of the great door. This fortress door is nearly 2 meters thick, and the heavy locking mechanism is buried securely deep within the dense core of the ancient oak and reinforced stone. He pushes the key inward smoothly until it stops with a soft, dull thud against the heavy internal backplate. He pauses for a long, peaceful moment, leaving the key resting perfectly horizontal in the lock. He takes another slow, deep breath, letting his chest fall heavily. The vast quiet of the courtyard waits patiently for him, holding its breath in the cold mist. The 2 guards stand absolutely still in the deep shadows, completely undisturbed by the soft metallic sounds. They know perfectly well that what happens next requires immense quiet focus and slow, steady strength. The chief treasurer wraps both of his bare, weathered hands firmly around the smooth, rounded head of the resting key. He shifts his weight slightly on the smooth, damp paving, stones bracing his legs evenly to provide the steady force needed to turn the massive internal levers. He begins to turn the heavy key. The initial movement is met with deep, heavy resistance. The internal parts of the ancient lock have rested quietly in the cold dark for many hours, and they require slow, deliberate pressure to slowly wake for as he applies a steady, completely even force. You can hear the fur-heavy iron tumbler lift. Slowly from its deep resting place inside the door, it makes a deep, hollow clacking sound. The noise is completely muffled by the immense thickness of the dense wood, creating a low, frequently echoing deep in your own rin chest. We special place be your own resting house. It is a slow, safe, deeply comforting sound. It is the sound of absolute protection holding you safely away from the busy world outside. He continues to turn the perfectly forged metal, one by one the heavy internal sequence, clack, in a flawless mechanical sequence, a long peaceful pause. Clack, another long, slow, calming pause. Each heavy movement is a distinct, satisfying step toward opening the silent vault. The slow, deliberate rhythm of the turning lock is incredibly hypnotic. It is a slow, methodical progression from you, but your quiet, relaxed attention. The final movement inside the door is the shifting of the main iron bolt. It is a massive piece of solid forged steel, sliding heavily horizontally, carved directly into the fortress wall. The slow friction of the heavy bolt sliding back creates a long, deep grinding noises against the marble pillars of the quiet courtyard. The heavy locking mechanism finally comes to a complete rest with a deep resonant clank that signals the massive door is officially unlocked. The treasurer slowly, gently removes his hands from the key, leaving it resting securely in the faceplate. He exhales a long, quiet breath into the cold, damp air. The immense physical barrier has been gently disengaged, but the heavy door itself still remains completely closed, holding the dark secrets of the Empire safely in sight. So, you are standing completely still on the peaceful threshold between the cold, sleeping city and the deepest, silent heart of the Grand Treasury. The heavy quiet of the night settles back over the courtyard in a perfect, dark, peaceful embrace. You are completely safe here. You can simply close your eyes and rest safely while you listen to the slow, steady breathing of the ancient stone. The master of the treasury places his strong covered shoulder against the solid ancient wood of the massive door. He leans forward slowly and pushes with a steady, even pressure, using the quiet, grounded weight of his own body to move the immense barrier. The great door slowly yields to his effort opening with a long, deep, heavy groan. The enormous iron hinges which have faithfully supported this colossal weight for many decades move verkepter, at a low, slow, continuous grinding sound that vibrates deeply through the thick stone floor. The noise is incredibly deep and heavily resonant, entirely unhurried. It is the sound of heavy time, itself slowly opening up to let you safely inside. The door swings slowly inward, disappearing into the total absolute darkness of the royal vault. As the heavy physical barrier opens a profound, gentle, wide belly of the fortress, to gently meet from the deep, dark belly of the fortress the damp, cold mist of the outer courtyard. The smell of the vault is completely distinct and deeply comforting. It is the dry, heavy scent of completely undisturbed stillness. You can smell the fine, chalky dust of ancient granite, the dry, aged parchment, metallic tan, the very faint, sharp, metallic tang of thousands of sleeping gold coins locked away in dark. Welcome a bulk wooden boxes. It is an air that has completely forgotten the warmth of the sun. It carries a perfect heavy silence that instantly naturally slows your breathing and tells your tired mind that it is finally time to sleep. He steps very slowly over the raised stone threshold, leaving the cold, misty courtyard and the two silent, watchful guards behind him. You follow him closely, stepping carefully over the heavy stone boundary and crossing directly into the absolute quiet of the inner sanctum. The vast, heavy darkness inside is immense and entirely peaceful. It feels exactly like stepping into a deep, dry cavern completely separated from the frantic flow of ordinary time. The brass lantern in his steady hand casts only a very small, soft pool of amber light on the incredibly smooth, dry stone floor. The high arched vaulted ceilings are completely swallowed by the deep black shadows far above your heavy head. He walks slowly toward a tall, heavy iron stand, positioned just inside the entrance, where a large copper oil lamp rests silently, waiting in the heavy dark. He carefully opens the small warm glass door of his lantern and gently carry the small golden flame from his lantern to the thick woven wick of the heavy copper. Go a power, lamp the fire catches slowly. It hesitates for a brief quiet moment in the cold dry air before blooming beautifully into a steady warm bright teardrop of gentle light. The fresh new flame casts long slow heavy stone walls, slowly revealing the massive solid shapes of heavy wooden chests and tall iron racks, lined up in perfect silent order in the far distance. The warm golden light begins to slowly push back the deep heavy darkness in the very centre of the vast sleeping fortress. The rich comforting smell of burning olive oil mixes deeply with the dry ancient dust, creating a thick intoxicating aroma that makes your heavy eyelids feel completely ready to close. You are entirely insulated from the chaotic, noisy, waking world outside, deeply protected within these thick, immovable walls. As we settle deeply into the warm, flickering light of the quiet vault, I want to gently remind you that this content was developed with the assistance of advanced AI tools and has been meticulously reviewed, verified, and edited by the editorial team at Whispers of Sentries, all rights reserved. Let this quiet, peaceful journey wash completely over you, and simply listen closely to the whispers of the past, because you never know what timeless wisdom might quietly find its way into your long, restful night. The chief treasurer turns back toward the open entrance, leaving the newly lit copper lamp resting securely on its heavy iron stand. He places both of his hands flat against the incredibly thick edge of the massive oak door. He leans his weight into the dark wood of sealing the vault. Deliberate process of sealing the vault. The enormous iron hinges groan once more, Verkepite had a deeply satisfying low-frequency vibration as the great door swings slowly outward to meet the thick stone frame. You can hear the slow, steady friction of the heavy timber moving through the quiet air as the door finally closes perfectly into its ancient resting place. There is a sudden dull thud that entirely shakes the smooth marble floor beneath your feet. He engages the massive internal locking bolt from the inside. A heavy solid clank echoes softly, confirming that the seal is complete. The moment the great iron bolt slides firmly into the stone wall, a profound and sudden transformation occurs within the space. The faint, distant hum of the ocean wind is instantly severed. The cold, damp draught from the strait is entirely cut off. You are left entirely alone with the master of the Treasury locked silent, completely impenetrable stone cocoon. The silence here is entirely different from the quiet of the outer courtyard. It is an incredibly thick, heavy silence that gently presses against your ears and wraps your tired mind in a deeply comforting heavy blanket. It is the absolute stillness of a place completely forgotten by the rapid movement of the outside world. The warm golden flame from the large copper oil lamp burns steadily in the perfectly calm air. The light reaches upward, casting a soft, rich amber glow against the high-vaulted stone ceiling. If you look slowly upward, you can see the masterful work of the ancient stone cutters. Massive blocks of pale grey granite are fitted together, verkepite, at absolute flawless precision, forming elegant, sweeping arches that support the unimaginable weight of the palace above. The flickering light from the oil lamp makes the deep shadows dance slowly across the curved stone surfaces. The shadows sway gently back and forth like heavy dark water, completely mesmerizing and entirely deeply soothing. If you find yourself slowly letting go of your daily worries, in this quiet hidden corner of the past, you might, perhaps, consider subscribing to our channel. We have built a deeply quiet community here, entirely dedicated to finding slow, peaceful rest in the forgotten shadows of history. Leaving a simple like on this video helps us continue to keep this safe little space going for whenever you need to escape the noisy demands of the modern world. But there is absolutely no pressure right now. Your only task tonight is to simply rest your heavy eyes and watch the golden shadows dance across the ancient vaulted ceiling. The treasurer picks up his small brass lantern once again. Its faint golden pool of light joins the steady glow of the larger lamp. He begins to walk slowly deeper into the vast belly of the sleeping fortress. His soft leather boots make a gentle muted thudding sound against the perfectly dry ancient paving stones. In this completely enclosed space, the sound does not echo sharply. Instead, the noise is completely absorbed, stored silently of the sleeping wealth, stored silently all around you. The sound is flat, slow, and entirely grounding, telling your mind exactly where you are in the safe, heavy dark. You follow quietly behind him, breathing in the warm, dry air of the inner sanctum. The temperature here is completely stable by the freezing winter night outside. The air smells wonderfully of dry melted beeswax, heavy ancient oak, and the faint unmistakable trace of raw dormant metal. You pass by long rows of enormous iron racks completely covered in deep shadows. There is absolutely no urgency here in the deep dark. The treasures of the Empire have waited perfectly still in this quiet room for many long years, and they will patiently continue to wait. You can simply match the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing to the quiet, unhurried footsteps of the treasurer, walking deeper and deeper into the completely safe, entirely peaceful heart of the sleeping world. The chief treasurer guides you slowly toward the very center of the vast stone room. where the shadows seem to gather with a profound heavy density. The gentle golden light from his small brass lantern slowly reveals a massive wooden desk resting completely silently in the dark. This desk is a truly magnificent piece of ancient heavy oak, carved entirely from a single colossal tree that once grew deep within the quiet, lush forests of the sprawling empire. The surface of the wood is incredibly dark, rich, and deeply profound. It has been polished meticulously for decades by the careful hands of countless royal keepers using thick heavy layers of natural beeswax and sweet aromatic almond oil. The soft light from the brass lantern reflects beautifully off the perfectly smooth flat surface, creating a warm, inviting pool of amber clarity right in the middle of the vast, cold stone fortress. He gently lowers his brass lantern onto the wide, unyielding surface of the ancient oak desk. The solid metal base of the lantern meets the heavy dark wood with a very soft, incredibly dull thud. It is a quiet, deeply satisfying sound that instantly grounds your wandering mind firmly in the present physical moment. He takes a long, slow, deep breath of the dry, warm air, filling his lungs completely before reaching the heavy wooden chair tucked neatly beneath the massive desk. The tall chair is heavily built, entirely carved from the exact same dark oak, and it is fitted with a remarkably thick, heavy cushion of deep crimson velvet. The dark red fabric looks incredibly soft and deeply inviting, absorbing the warm lantern light and offering a profound, comforting sense of warmth in this heavily austere stone environment. With a very slow and entirely deliberate motion, he pulls the heavy chair backward over the completely smooth, ancient paving stones. The thick, heavy wooden legs dare row gently against the dry stone, creating a low, deeply resonant scraping sound. The noise is completely blunt, entirely unhurried, and deeply muffled by the immense physical thickness of the surrounding granite walls. It is the slow, comforting sound of a long, peaceful night of quiet labor finally beginning. The gentle, slow friction of heavy wood against smooth stone vibrates very faintly through the floor, traveling directly up through the soft leather soles of your boots, wall skills, and gently relaxing the heavy, tired muscles in your legs. It is a completely safe, incredibly grounding vibration that tells your body it is entirely of total rest, to sink deeper into a state of total rest. The master of the Treasury lowers his body slowly into the heavy wooden chair. The thick crimson velvet cushion compresses very gently beneath his weight with a barely audible soft sighing sound as the trapped air slowly escapes the dense fabric. The heavy dark woven wool of his long winter cloak pulls softly around his knees, draping completely over the thick edges of the wide wooden seat. He allows his tired shoulders to drop entirely, releasing any lingering tension from his long solitary walk through the cold, damp outer courtyards. He is completely at home, here in the deep, quiet darkness of the inner sanctum. The vast, unimaginable wealth of the entire empire is that his mind remains completely focused, completely calm, and entirely undisturbed by the enormous heavy weight of his quiet nocturnal responsibility. He places both of his bare hands completely flat against the incredibly smooth, wide surface of the dark oak desk. The ancient wood is pleasantly cool to the touch at first, but it very quickly absorbs the gentle, natural warmth of his resting skin. He moves his palms very slowly across the wide, polished grain, the sensation of his dry skin gliding effortlessly over the slow, perfectly waxed wood. It is a slow, continuous motion, completely smooth and entirely frictionless. The wood grain is intensely dense, tightly packed by centuries of slow memory of countless peaceful nights, spent meticulously recording the heavy shifting tides of royal roiled gold and silver. You can simply close your eyes and almost feel direct smooth beneath your own hands. It is a feeling of absolute permanence and total unyielding support. The desk will not move, and the deep heavy walls will not fall. You are held completely securely in this quiet, isolated pocket of time. The steady, warm flame of the lantern casts a long, soft shadow of the seated man against the high stone wall behind him. The shadow is totally motionless, radiating a deep completely over you, gently pulling you further down into the safe dark embrace of a heavy dreamless sleep. Then the master of the Treasury reaches slowly toward the far right edge of his wide wooden desk. His hand finds the cold, smooth rim of a large, shallow copper tray. This tray is incredibly old, holding the heavy weight of countless midnight audits. The copper has oxidized deeply over the long years, turning from a bright, harsh metal into a deep, soft, earthy brown, completely absorbing the warm light of the lantern rather than reflecting it, sharply. He pulls the heavy metal tray slowly toward the center of the desk. The flat bottom of the copper tray slides very gently across the polished beeswax surface of the ancient oak. It makes a long, low, sweeping sound, a quiet, steady friction that feels deep of a completely organized mind. It is the sound of preparing a perfectly ordered space. He positions the copper tray directly in front of him, making sure it is perfectly aligned with the straight edge of the heavy desks. The wide tray will hold the countless gold and silver coins later tonight, catching them safely so they do not ever roll away into the deep dark shadows of the silent vault. Once the tray is perfectly placed, his slow, deliberate hands move to a small, heavy glass bottle resting near the warm brass lantern. It is a stout inkwell crafted from incredibly thick, dark green glass, blown by the master glassmakers of the old coastal city. The glass is incredibly heavy and completely solid, designed to never tip over during the long, quiet hours of the night. He wraps his long, weathered fingers gently around the thick, round base of the heavy glass inkwell. With his other hand, he firmly grasps the dense wooden stopper that tightly seals the dark liquid entirely inside. He twists the stopper very slowly, applying a steady, gentle pressure. The dense wood groans very softly against the thick glass opening, producing a little low, muffled squeak, the stone room for just a brief, beautiful second. As the stopper finally releases, with a completely soft, hollow pop, a profound and very distinct scent immediately rises from the open bottle. It is the sharp, clean, earthy smell of dark iron gall ink, heavily mixed with crushed oak bark and fine black soot. It is the deep, rich smell of ancient administration, the scent of history being slowly and very carefully written down. He places the dark wooden stopper quietly on the desk directly beside the inkwell. Now he reaches out for his writing instrument. It is a single long, perfectly straight flight feather from a large grey goose. The hollow shaft is incredibly smooth and completely dry. The delicate barbs of the feather are a soft mottled grey, looking perfectly soft to the gentle touch. He picks up a very small, heavy penknife with a smooth, polished bone handle and a tiny, incredibly sharp steel blade. He opens the small blade with a soft, deeply satisfying metallic click. Holding the hollow tip of the long feather perfectly steady in his left hand, he brings the sharp steel edge of the knife down against the hard, dry keratin. He makes a series of very small, very precise slicing motions. The sharp steel completely and cleanly sheaves away tiny thin curls of the feather shaft. The sound is incredibly crisp and deeply rhythmic. A slow, calm pause. Another slow, sharp scrape. Another long, peaceful breath. The tiny, translucent shavings fall completely silently onto the dark, polished wood of the desk, like tiny gentle flakes of dry winter snow. This slow, meticulous process of shaping the quill is a deeply quiet form of personal meditation, entirely focusing the weary mind on one single beautiful tiny task. The sheer simplicity of the action leaves absolutely no room for worry or heavy anxiety. Everything here in the dark is entirely under control, perfectly measured, and completely understood. You can simply let your own tired mind focus entirely on that small, crisp, rhythmic sound, letting all other lingering thoughts simply vacapare away into the heavy, peaceful dark surrounding you. Your room is completely safe and the long night is watching over you with perfect quiet patience. The master treasurer carefully places his freshly shaped goose quill down onto the perfectly smooth surface of the dark oak desk. The light hollow shaft makes a completely soft hollow tapping sound as it settles against the heavy wood. His weathered hands now move slowly toward the very center of the wide desk, where a remarkably thick, heavy object rests completely silently in the dark. This is the Grand Royal Ledger, the supreme accounting book of the vast empire, holding the most closely guarded financial secrets of the realm. The thick outer cover is crafted from incredibly dense cured calfskin, dyed a completely profound black, and polished to a deeply soft muted shine. He gently rests his dry palms flat against the cold, heavy leather. The thick binding is entirely smooth, but it countless previous nights of quiet, careful work. As his thumbs slowly trace the thick, heavy edges of the ancient leather, you can clearly hear a completely soft, dull rubbing sound. It is a low, quiet friction that deeply speaks of total absolute security and the long, patient years of careful, meticulous preservation. The heavy book feels exactly like a solid anchor, completely grounding the wandering mind in the absolute present moment. If listening to the slow, quiet unfolding of the past helps you find a completely restful peace tonight, you are entirely welcome to subscribe to our channel. We will always be here in the dark to gently share these deeply calming, slow journeys with you. Whenever your heavy, tired mind needs a completely safe, quiet place to finally rest, let that gentle thought softly fade away as we return completely to the slow, patient work of the sleeping treasury. He slowly unfastens the thick, heavy brass clasp that holds the massive book securely closed. The old metal clasp opens with a very soft, dull, satisfying click, completely releasing the immense pressure bound inside the thick pages. He places his right hand completely flat against the heavy front leather cover and very slowly turns it open. The pages resting inside are crafted from heavy, dense parchment made entirely from the finest stretched animal skin. As the heavy cover lifts up and the remarkably stiff, dry pages slowly begin to bend on, the ancient ledger releases a profound and deeply intoxicating smell directly into the warm, quiet air. It is the incredibly rich, heavy scent of dry, deep earth, ancient binding glue, of favorite parchment, and the faint, comforting, deep aroma of sweet, dark sealing oil. The thick air holds this complex fragrance, perfectly allowing you to breathe it in slowly and deeply. The physical sound of the remarkably thick parchment pages turning is incredibly distinct and deeply soothing. It is not at all the thin, sharp, fast rustle of ordinary modern paper. Instead, it is a slow, deep, heavy scraping sound. The beautifully rough, porous texture of the thick gently against one another creates a low, comforting frequency that feels incredibly grounding to simply hear. It is a completely slow, heavy crinkle, a beautifully muted rustling sound that carries the immense quiet weight of careful, deeply measured history. He slowly, gently turns one heavy, stiff page, and then he pauses, taking a long, completely slow breath. Then he slowly turns another heavy page, taking his absolute time to find the perfectly completely blank sheet meant for tonight. Each completely slow turn of the heavy stiff page sends a tiny, gentle wave of dry ancient air, washing completely over the warm flickering flame of the small brass lantern. The golden teardrop of warm light sways very gently back and forth, casting incredibly long, slow-moving shadows across the ancient stone walls of the vast vault. The quiet rhythm of his slow, methodical actions is perfectly deeply hypnotic. A completely slow, heavy rustle of dry, ancient parchment, a soft, gentle sway of the warm golden light, a long, deeply slow breath of the thick, incredibly comforting air. You are completely, entirely enveloped in this slow, beautiful, deeply quiet routine, completely protected from any rush or worry of the waking world outside. The incredibly heavy, thick book now lies entirely open before him, perfectly flat, and completely ready to safely receive the quiet golden secrets of the long, peaceful night. The master treasurer holds the freshly carved goose quill perfectly steady above the thick open ledger. The warm amber light from the large copper lamp washes completely over the wide, completely slank thick parchment page for the slow beginning of his careful night work. Weeks. He dips the remarkably sharp, narrow tip of the dry feather very slowly into the heavy, dark green glass inkwell. The hollow keratin shaft enters the thick liquid with a completely soft, deeply wet sound. The dark iron gall ink is incredibly rich and deeply viscous, clinging completely to the perfectly shaped tip of the lighter feather, as he slowly, gently draws the quill back up out of the heavy glass bottle, completely silently back into the dark pool. Below, creating a tiny, gentle ripple in the quiet glass jar. He moves his remarkably steady hand gracefully over the wide-open book and softly begins to write. The sharp steel-carved tip of the quill touches the rough, porous surface. The sound is instantly profound parchment. The sound is instantly mesmerizing. It is a very slow, beautifully dry, wonderfully crisp scratching noise, a long, heavy curving sweep, a slow, deeply gentle pause, a completely deliberate downward stroke. The sound of the quill slowly moving across the dry, thick page is the deeply rhythmic heartbeat of the silent, sleeping treasury. It is an incredibly steady, wonderfully comforting friction that perfectly anchors the wandering, tired mind completely to the quiet, physical work being done in the heavy, peaceful dark. He is writing in the completely secret and intensely complex script of the royal court, famously known as the Divani script. This completely unique style of writing is heavily guarded and entirely high-stick levels of the imperial administration. And the completely elegant letters do not sit rigidly on a flat, boring straight line. Instead, they slope completely complex curves, in beautifully sweeping, wonderfully complex curves. The heavy, dark words flow entirely together, looping and gently twisting in a profoundly intricate, incredibly elegant, slow dance. Across the thick, dry page, it is a completely beautiful and entirely impenetrable code, entirely designed to completely hide the vast, immense wealth of the unauthorized waking eyes from any unauthorized waking eyes. The dark, wet ink shines completely beautifully in the warm, flickering lantern light, catching the very gentle golden reflection before slowly drying into a completely flat, deep, absolute black. Every single carefully drawn curve and heavily shaded loop carries the immense quiet weight of a massive empire stretching safely across three distinct continents. The completely precise sweeping lines meticulously record the vast endless flow of gold-silver capped from very distant grand battles and safely gently carried across. Captured endless befti, towering cold mountains and deep wide slow rivers, yet here completely isolated in the entirely silent heart of the heavy stone fortress, All of that vast, noisy quietly reduced to absolutely nothing more than a slow, gentle, scratching sound in the deep, completely quiet dark. The master treasurer breathes completely slowly entirely, matching the beautifully long sweeping curves of his complex writing. Inhale completely gently as the light pen sweeps smoothly upward. Exhale completely slowly as the dark, rich ink pulls heavily downward. You can completely safely let your own slow, steady, tired breathing match the exact quiet, gentle rhythm of his careful, slow writing. The entirely complex Divani script slowly fills the incredibly wide blank page with completely beautiful thick dark, transforming the entirely empty parchment into a completely dense, heavy, not landscape of profound, deeply silent history. There is absolutely no rush at all anywhere in this completely silent room. Every single dark line is drawn with complete, total, profound patience, deeply respecting the heavy, completely quiet peace of the long, deep night. The sheer, absolute, total focus script leaves to effectively write in this beauty. Weary, entirely, absolutely, no room in the weary mind for any fast-racing thoughts or heavy daily worldly worries. The scent of the iron gall ink grows completely deeply rich and wonderfully comforting in the safely enclosed space. It is a sharp, slightly bitter, incredibly earthy smell that completely clears the tired, heavy mind and gently pull dreamless, peaceful rest. Completely dreamless, peaceful rest. You are entirely safe here, completely free to simply let go of everything and sleep. The master of the Treasury gently places his finely shaped goose quill back onto the perfectly smooth surface of the dark oak desk. He takes a long, slow, deeply comforting breath, filling his chest completely with the warm, dry air of the heavily protected vault. His first highly secretive entry in the grand ledger is completely finished, safely recording the date and the specific nature of his midnight duty. Now he must completely turn his quiet, focused attention to the immense physical wealth, resting silently lit in the deep shadows just beyond the warm pool of his amber lantern light. He slowly pushes his heavy chair backward, and the thick wooden legs produce that same low grounding friction against the ancient stone floor. He stands up vec completely slow and perfectly deliberate grace. He picks up the small brass lantern and walks completely signed row of massive dark wooden chests, resting silently against the far heavy stone wall. These immense boxes are entirely constructed from thick solid oak, heavily bound completely in wide thick bands of hand-forged iron. They are incredibly heavy, entirely immovable to any single ordinary man, and they hold the vast primary wealth of the sprawling empire. The brass lantern light slowly gently washes over the front of the first massive chest, entirely illuminating the completely thick layer of a fine grey dust that has slowly beautifully settled over the heavy dark wood during the long quiet weeks of completely undisturbed rest. He kneels completely slowly onto the smooth cold paving stones directly in front of the heavy wooden chest. The thick dark wool of his heavy winter cloak folds completely softly around him, draping gently over the completely cold floor. He reaches his weathered hands forward, completely slowly gripping the thick cold iron handles secured heavily to the completely flat top lid. The raw iron is intensely cold to the bare touch, a completely sharp grounding sensation that entirely keeps his mind perfectly alert and deeply, completely calm. He completely slowly, entirely gently begins to pull the massive heavy lid upward. The incredibly thick ancient iron hinges completely holding the massive wooden lid securely in place have rested perfectly silently in the deep dark for a very long time. As the heavy lid slowly begins to rise, the cold iron completely slowly rubs against cold iron, producing a completely long, deeply low, incredibly drawn-out groaning sound. It is a completely slow, deep heavy that perfectly beautifully echoes, completely softly throughout the entirely vast, completely empty stone fortress. The sound is completely unhurried, entirely devoid of any sudden sharpness or heavy harshness. It is simply the completely beautifully slow, completely profound sound of slowly immense heavy weight in the gently shifting in the completely quiet dark. As the incredibly heavy thick oak lid fully slowly open smelled immediately, deep fired completely softly from the deep dark interior of the heavy box. It is the completely beautifully unmistakable scent of entirely cold, heavily dormant metal, mixed completely deeply with the dry ancient dust of the heavy oak interior. It is the incredibly heavy, entirely clean, completely pure smell of raw minted gold perfectly safely sleeping in the completely dark, heavy silence. The warm, deeply gentle golden light from his small plea spills over the very thick edge of the wide open chest, completely. Slowly, safely touching the vast, entirely silent ocean of heavy imperial wealth waiting patiently inside. Thousands upon entirely countless thousands of smalls, the beautiful, heavy aches rest perfectly entirely, completely silently side. The dark, wooden cavity. They are completely beautifully, completely softly, shimmer perfectly completely, catching the gentle, warm amber light and entirely softly reflecting it back, completely into the heavy, deep, dark shadows. The completely immense, absolute scale of the entirely quiet, completely dormant wealth is profoundly, completely, entirely humbling. It is an entirely silent, heavily, completely soft gold, resting absolutely, perfectly, entirely undisturbed, beneath the heavy, thick, complete safety of the blue, complete, unceased, incredibly deep, incredibly strong stone fortress. This story is based on the royal logistics of 9th century Europe, adapted from the historical atmosphere of the Valois era. It has been carefully edited for your deep relaxation by the whispers of Sentries channel. They do not make a single sound right now. They are completely, perfectly, entirely still. The master treasurer completely, slowly, gently reaches completely forward, entirely, into the completely heavy, beautiful, dark wooden box. His long, quiet, completely careful fingers deeply, slowly touch the completely cold, completely heavy surface of the topmost layer of the beautiful, pure, soft gold. And the metal is completely, incredibly heavily cold, deeply freezing from the long, completely silent, heavy nights, spent entirely hidden, completely away from the warm sun. You can simply completely breathe in the heavily slow, entirely, completely safe, dry ancient air and let the completely soft, warm, beautiful golden reflection entirely soothe your heavy, incredibly tired, deeply quiet eyes. The master of the treasury slowly cups his bare, weathered hands deep inside the massive, ancient wooden chest. His long, steady fingers gently slide through the cold, sleeping gold. The thin, wonderfully minted aches coins flow completely smoothly against his warm skin. They feel incredibly heavy and wonderfully dense. Pure gold is profoundly different from any ordinary base metal. It possesses a uniquely soft grounding weight that deeply anchors the wandering, tired mind. As he pushes his hands deeper into the quiet, dormant pile, the countless thousands of small gold coins shift and slide against one another in the heavy dark. The incredibly soft noise they make is beautifully breathtaking. It is a rich, heavily muted metallic whispering, a low, dense, heavy rustle of pure solid ancient wealth gently waking up in the deep, quiet night. The heavy metal entirely lacks the harsh, loud, jarring clatter of ordinary iron or cheap steel. Instead, it is a muffled, wonderfully fluid, deeply soothing sound. It sounds exactly like a slow, calm, shallow stream, softly flowing over incredibly smooth ancient river stones. You can simply safely let that low, heavy, relaxing, rustling sound verkep et hat over your tired shoulders, weary muscles in your rest bang and heavy neck. Yes. He carefully lifts a full, incredibly heavy double handful of the cold, pure gold up from the deep wooden chest. The sheer profound physical weight of the precious metal resting directly in his two bare hands is completely immense, but his steady grip remains perfectly unmoving and entirely calm. He turns his body, slowly taking careful, perfectly gentle steps back toward the heavy dark oak desk. The beautifully soft leather soles of his thick winter boots completely absorb any sound of his incredibly slow walking. This leaves only the extremely faint, gentle shifting of the heavy gold coins, slowly resting safely in his deeply careful hands. He arrives perfectly silently at the heavy ancient wooden desk and slowly leans his steady weight gently forward over the wide, shallow, intensely oxidized dark copper tray. He slowly lowers his full hands until they are hovering safely, just a single small quiet inch directly above the dark, cold, heavy metal surface. He gently opens the small, narrow gap between his lower fingers, allowing the heavy, beautiful, cold, pure gold coins to begin falling beautifully slowly downward into the resting tray. The very first heavy gold aix coin gently strikes the dark copper tray with a beautifully soft second heavy third. Then a beautifully slow second heavy coin falls gently. Then a perfectly slow third. Soon a steady, beautifully slow, narrow stream of heavy, pure, cold gold begins pouring gently from his weathered hands directly onto the dark, entirely ancient copper. The beautiful, deep, heavy sound is entirely perfectly hypnotic. A low, heavily gentle, completely slow, melodic tapping rhythm completely fills the air. It is a completely steady, unhurried, heavy rhythm that perfectly mirrors the slow, gentle beating of a deeply resting, sleeping heart. The heavy, pure gold coins slowly spread out completely across the wide, dark, heavily oxidized copper tray. They beautifully catch the warm, gently flickering eto-ep-te light of the small, heavy brass lantern. They completely naturally create a deeply mesmerizing, quiet pool of perfectly soft, gleaming, warm amber light directly in the middle of the entirely cold, incredibly deep, dark, incredibly strong stone fortress. He perfectly slowly empties his warm hands, letting the very last beautiful heavy gold coin fall completely softly directly into the quiet, gleaming pile. The entirely mesmerizing, deeply rhythmic, slow, gentle sound perfectly slowly fades beautifully away into the cold vault air. It perfectly leaves behind a completely beautiful, heavy, deep, absolute, profoundly safe, resting silence, gently guiding you slowly downward into a completely deep and heavy, peaceful sleep. The Master Treasurer sits completely still before the wide copper tray. The warm amber glow rests silently under the warm amber glow of the brass lantern. He slowly reaches his bare hands into the still pool of heavy coins. He presses his dry palms flat against the top layer of the cold, sleeping metal. The pure gold is remarkably cool to the touch. It has absorbed the deep chill of the stone vault over many long, undisturbed hours. This profound coldness slowly transfers into his warm skin, creating a highly grounding physical sensation. It is a slow, deeply calming feeling that perfectly anchors the wandering mind to the solid present moment. He gently pushes his long, weathered fingers deep down into the center of the golden pile. The smooth, thin coins yield softly to his gentle pressure. They slide smoothly past his knuckles and rest heavily against the skin of his lower palms. Pure ancient gold holds a remarkably unique physical texture. It is completely smooth, entirely devoid of the rough bite found in forged iron or raw silver. It feels almost fluid, like heavy frozen water, resting perfectly silently in the dark. He slowly lifts his hands, bringing a heavy cluster of the cold coins upward into the warm lantern light. The small round pieces of gold slide softly against one another. They produce a beautifully muted, dense metallic whispering sound. It is an incredibly low-frequency rustle that deeply soothes the tired ear. He slowly parts his fingers just a fraction of an inch. The heavy coins immediately begin to slip smoothly through the narrow spaces between his bare digits. They fall completely slowly downward, dropping back into the dark copper tray. Each falling coin catches the soft flickering warm light of the oil flame for just one passing second. The warm light reflects beautifully off the minted surfaces, creating tiny slow-moving flashes of deep rich amber that dance gently across the heavy dark oak desk. The visual rhythm of the falling gold perfectly matches the incredibly slow heavy cadence of his deeply steady breathing. Inhale completely, slowly, as the heavy coins are lifted. Exhale completely peacefully as the soft gold softly slips away. There is absolutely no earthly desire in his completely calm movements. He simply feels the completely safe, predictable, physical weight of cold matter. The emotional detachment of his slow sorting is profoundly comforting. You can safely absorb this total calm, letting all of your own heavy worldly attachments softly slip away, just like the heavy cold gold falling perfectly silently back into the dark safe resting shadows. The master of the Treasury gently pushes the wide copper tray of softly gleaming gold coins to the upper left corner of his vast dark oak discs. His quiet work with the beautiful minted axe is completely finished for this single silent hour. He slowly turns his hooded head toward a heavily reinforced lower iron rack, resting completely deep in the thick shadows near the stone floor. The warm golden light from the brass lantern barely reaches this low heavy place, leaving it wrapped in a profoundly dark and deeply heavy mystery. He slowly lowers his body, bending his weary knees with a quiet, steady grace. He reaches his bare, weathered hands deep into the cold, lower shadows to retrieve the next heavy burden of the long night watch. His long, steady fingers find the incredibly rough, cold surface of a raw cast silver ingot. The physical texture of the raw silver is completely different from the perfectly smooth, soft minted gold he just completely gently handled. The heavy, unrefined silver is intensely coarse, deeply pockmarked hat, tiny rough craters from the ancient casting process. It feels wonderfully grounded and completely deeply earthy to the slow, quiet touch. He wraps his strong hands firmly around the thick rectangular block of heavy cold silver. The sheer physical density of the raw unminted metal is entirely staggering. It requires a slow, deep inhalation of the quiet vault air to safely, steadily lift the heavy block away from the dark iron rack. He rises completely slowly, bringing the incredibly heavy raw silver up into the warm, gentle amber light of the quiet, sleeping treasury. He walks the short, perfectly silent distance back to his heavy, dark oak desk. He completely slowly, entirely carefully lowers the massive silver ingot onto the perfectly smooth, dark waxed wood. The heavy raw metal makes contact with the solid ancient oak, producing a completely profound, deep, completely dull, heavy thud. It is a slow, heavy, deeply resonant sound that completely lacks any high, sharp, ringing note. The heavy, low-frequency vibration travels perfectly deeply, directly through the thick wooden desk, and slowly, gently down into the completely solid ancient stone floor. You can easily, completely, deeply imagine feeling that safe, heavy, deeply grounding vibrations traveling the heavy, warm mattress directly beneath your tired, resting body. Nond me pone warm grinka. The heavy silver ingot rests completely silently in the warm golden lantern light. The rough, deeply textured surface of the metal does not brightly reflect the gentle flame. Instead, it completely absorbs the soft light, creating a beautifully dim, entirely frosted, white glow that looks perfectly like heavily completely packed ancient winter snow. The deep kept coldness of the heavy silver slowly radiates perfectly gently into the warm, dry ancient air of the heavily protected vault. It creates a deeply beautiful, entirely quiet, deeply comforting contrast between the warm golden flame and the completely deep freezing slumber of the raw heavy metal. You can safely completely slowly let your own anchor itself completely securely to that immense heavy raw physical weight. The massive silver will absolutely never move. It will perfectly silently stay exactly where it is completely forever, deeply safe in the dark, perfectly completely holding you entirely steady while you finally safely completely drift away into heavily deep, wonderfully quiet, dreamless sleep. The master of the Treasury reaches his steady weathered hand back toward the perfectly smooth surface of the dark oak desk. His long quiet fingers gently pick up the deeply light, finely shaped goose quill once again. He must now perfectly accurately record the immense physical weight of the newly retrieved heavy raw silver ingot, resting silently in the warm amber lantern light. He completely slowly gently dips the beautifully sharp narrow tip of the dry feather directly into the thick dark green glass inkwell. The completely hollow keratin shaft enters the heavy viscous liquid with a profoundly soft, deeply wet sound. The dark iron gall ink clings perfectly to the sharp tip as he slowly gently draws the feather back upward into the warm, dry vault air. He moves his completely steady hand gracefully over the completely wide open, heavy black calfskin ledger. He positions the sharp ink, heavily coated tip directly against the deeply rough, completely porous surface of the incredibly thick ancient parchment page. As the heavy writing slowly begins, the perfectly quiet, completely silent stone room is entirely filled with an incredibly crisp, deeply beautifully dry scratching sound. It is a slow, deeply heavy sweeping sound of completely sharp carving, slowly dragging across deeply heavy dry skin. A long, beautifully, entirely slow, heavy sweeping curve. A completely slow, incredibly steady, deeply profound downward stroke. The entirely beautiful, complex letters of the highly secret Divani script slowly beautifully appear on the heavy dry page. The incredibly heavy, completely freezing physical mass of safely raw silver ingot is safely incredibly thin, entirely flat, completely dark, graceful lines. The vast, completely heavy wealth of to absolutely nothing more than a deeply quiet, beautifully slow, rustling whisper of ink entirely meeting dry ancient parchment. His breathing is incredibly, completely, deeply, perfectly slow, entirely rhythmic and beautifully, profoundly steady. He breathes completely, deeply, entirely softly, in complete, perfect harmony, with the deeply slow, entirely measured, completely, beautifully sweeping movements of his writing. Hand. Inhale completely, peacefully, deeply, as the light feather gracefully slowly lifts entirely away from the completely dry, rough page. Exhale completely heavily, entirely softly, as the deeply sharp tip gently, perfectly presses down to completely carefully draw the entirely next complex sweeping curve. You can completely safely, naturally, slowly let your own heavy, tired chest deeply rise and completely slowly fall in the perfectly exact, safely measured rhythm. There is absolutely no heavy rush and completely, absolutely no worldly worry anywhere in this perfectly safe, deeply silent, entirely dark, heavy stone fortress. The beautifully, deeply sharp, incredibly earthy, comforting scent of completely gently mixes completely deeply with the incredibly profound, deep, heavy, freezing scent. Deep, heavy scent of the raw, ancient silver. It completely gently, perfectly smoothly wraps your completely tired, entirely, perfectly safe, heavily resting, deeply peaceful, sleeping mind in a soft, heavy blanket of perfect ancient quiet. The master treasurer pauses his slow, careful writing for a single quiet moment. He leaves the dark, wet ink resting perfectly safely on the dry, ancient parchment. He lifts his hooded head slowly toward the Eiger hat vaulted stone ceiling of the deep, dark fortress. Far above the warm, gentle amber light of his quiet, heavy oak desk, there are several extremely small, completely narrow, vertical granite walls, carved directly into the incredibly thick, ancient granite walls. These tiny, dark openings were carefully designed by the ancient stone cutters to allow a perfectly measured amount of cold, freshened air to so slowly enter the heavily sealed vault. Outside, the completely dark, heavy midnight wind from the vast, sleeping Bosphorus sea is blowing gently against the impenetrable outer stone walls of the royal palace. The cold, damp sea wind slowly finds these narrow, ancient stone channels. As the heavy night air slowly squeezes through the immensely thick, dense stone, it produces a low, deeply beautiful, completely soft humming sound. It is a continuous, deeply slow, hollow whistling noise that entirely echoes softly down into the warm, safe, completely quiet resting vault. This low-frequency sound of the cold ocean wind perfectly mimics the deeply massive ancient creature, softly breathing in the dark night. The beautiful soft howling gently reminds you of the harsh, cold, entirely freezing, chaotic waking world that exists far away outside these massive, completely protective heavy stone walls. Down here, safely hidden deeply away in the perfectly safe, warm, golden lantern light, you are entirely harsh, blighting winter wind from every single harsh, biting winter wind. The faint smell of salt and deep freezing water travels slowly down through the high stone slits. This incredibly clean, sharp scent of the winter sea beautifully mixes with the completely warm, heavily dry, the smell of the melting beeswax and the incredibly rich, dark ink resting on the heavy wooden desk. A single tiny, gentle draught of cold air occasionally perfectly reaches the heavy, flat surface of the dark oak, completely gently touching the single bright, golden teardrop flame of the heavy brass lantern. The warm, completely gentle amber light beautifully slowly sways incredibly long, completely deep, heavy, beautifully slow moving shadows across the deeply silent brass, heavily dormant and completely sleeping silver and gold, resting entirely peacefully in the deep, quiet dark. The stark, completely beautiful howling of the cold sea wind and the perfectly safe, warm, completely still dry air directly wrapping around. You're tired resting. Hord, Retu and Boggome's body is profoundly comforting. The cold wind cannot reach you down here. The loud, deeply demanding outside world absolutely cannot touch you behind these incredibly thick, deep, ancient stone walls. You are entirely safely enveloped in a perfectly warm ancient time. You can safely gently sink further. Deo ver, kep ner, into your soft, resting, warm, heavy bed, the completely distant, perfectly gentle, howling wind slowly sings a beautiful, heavy, slow lullaby, entirely your deeply tired, peaceful mind, directly into a deeply beautiful, entirely dark, dreamless sleep. Just simply listen to the slow, heavy breathing of the ancient stone, and completely, entirely let go of the long, heavy day. The master of the treasury lowers his hooded head and completely surrenders his quiet mind to the deeply slow, heavy rhythm of his ancient nocturnal duty. He slowly reaches out and touches the cold, heavy silver ingot resting on the dark oak desk. He completely gently rough-cast surface of the weathered thumb across the deeply rough-cast surface of the raw metal. The physical friction is entirely grounding perfectly, pulling his tired mind away from any loud wandering thoughts. He slowly turns his body and deeply safely reaches into the dark copper tray, filled completely with the soft gleaming gold coins. He gently picks up exactly 3 heavy minted coins. He completely, slowly, entirely carefully places them, next to the massive raw silver block. The gold touches the raw silver with a beautifully soft, perfectly, completely dull, heavy click. He completely slowly picks up the finely shaped goose quill. He completely gently safely dips the sharp, dry tip into the incredibly heavy, dark green glass inkwell. The hollow feather enters the thick, dark iron gall ink with that completely profoundly wet, deeply soft sound. He slowly draws it back up into the warm, dry, heavily protected vault air. He moves his completely steady resting hand over the thick, heavy, dry parchment of the open black leather ledger. He presses the sharp tip down and slowly, beautifully, completely draws the deeply complex, heavy, dark lines of the secret court script. The incredibly dry, completely beautiful, deeply crisp scratching sound perfectly entirely fills the heavily silent stone room. A slow, heavy sweep. A deeply, completely safe long pause. A profoundly slow downward stroke. This incredibly slow, deeply heavy cycle of quiet physical movement repeats itself completely perfectly entirely over and over again, completely peaceful. In the deeply heavy, completely peaceful dark, a completely slow, heavy, deeply gentle touch of cold, solid, ancient metal, a beautifully slow resting, click of pure gold resting against raw silver, a perfectly, completely slow, safely measured, deep dip of the light feather into the incredibly rich, heavy, dark ink, a profoundly, completely beautiful, heavy, completely dry, scratching of sharp steel against deeply thick ancient parchment. It is a completely beautifully slow, that entirely hypnotic, deeply heavy rhythm, perfectly wraps your heavy, tired mind of profound, thick, warm, blankest of warm ancient, entirely both peace. There is absolutely completely nothing entirely new or heavy or sharply surprising in this completely perfect, slow, deeply measured repetition. Every single beautifully slow, deliberate movement perfectly anticipates the completely beautifully slow, entirely safe movement that safely, perfectly, softly follows it. Your completely heavy, tired, resting mind does not entirely need to predict or perfectly think about absolutely anything at all. You can completely, safely, deeply, totally surrender your entire heavy resting body completely to this incredibly slow, heavy, profoundly peaceful, ancient physical rhythm. The completely beautiful, deep rhythmic scratching of the heavy dark ink and the entirely heavily muted shifting of the cold, pure gold, gently perfectly. Completely softly, lull, you directly, entirely, completely downward. The master breathes completely deeply, entirely, slowly matching the perfect exact heavy timing of the dark writing. Inhale completely deeply as the hand reaches. Exhale completely slowly as the heavy ink marks the dry page. The completely safe, warm golden light from the heavy brass lantern completely, perfectly softly across the high ancient stone walls, completely entirely, watching over. Entirely, you watching your incredibly deep, beautifully safe, perfectly heavy, dreamless, long night of complete, profound, entirely restful sleep. The master of the Treasury softly places the finely shaped goose quill back onto the perfectly polished dark oak desk. His quiet, measured accounting of the pure gold and raw silver is entirely finished for this deeply peaceful hour. He slowly turns his hooded head toward a completely different, heavy dark corner of the vast sleeping stone fortress. Far beyond the safely warm, gentle pool of his bright amber lantern light there perfectly rests a massive, newly arrived, incredibly heavy, dark wooden shadow. He picks up the small, heavy brass lantern completely gently from the smoothly waxed wooden desk. He slowly, entirely, peacefully rises from the heavy crimson velvet chair. The remarkably thick wooden legs perfectly softly, the completely dry ancient floor producing a completely low, deeply grounding, heavy, deeply resonant sound. He begins to completely, slowly, safely lurker deep into the incredibly quiet, heavy, cold darkness. The beautifully soft leather soles of his thick winter boots make absolutely no loud sound on the perfectly smooth marble paving stones. He is quietly walking directly toward a long, high stack of heavy, rough, freshly cut pine crates. These incredibly large, raw, unpolished wooden boxes were very recently safely carried, completely slowly, across a Verte endless, dark mountains directly from the distant cold western fields of a deep, grand historic battle. The heavy, completely rough, fresh pine wood smells entirely differently from the deeply sweet, polished, ancient, heavy oak desk. Oh, it is a completely sharp, incredibly rare, kept entirely fresh, beautifully deep scent of wild, distant, cold forests. The warm, gentle, golden light from the small, heavy brass lantern slowly, beautifully, gently, entirely over the completely rough, heavily splintered surface of the thick, heavy pine boards. Thick. You can perfectly clearly see the incredibly thick, heavily packed lay earth, perfectly, completely heavily, clinging to the rough, raw wood. It is the incredibly dry, ancient, soft dust of the completely long, heavily marched, cold western roads. The completely silent, heavy, thick dust has safely countless deep freezing rivers, and perfectly quiet, endless valleys to finally safely completely peacefully, right here directly inside this entirely secure, deeply cold, heavy stone vault. The deeply quiet physical reality, harsh, completely violent waking journey is entirely perfectly safely reduced to absolutely nothing more than a completely, still, heavily more, a completely, still, silent, beautifully soft, pale grey powder perfectly gently resting perfectly softly in the completely heavily deep, beautiful, perfect dark. He completely slowly reaches his completely bare, deeply weathered, entirely steady hand safely forward. His long, perfectly quiet, entirely calm fingers completely gently, perfectly softly touch the incredibly rough, completely dry, harsh surface of the heavy pine crate. The completely raw, completely unpolished, heavy, thick pine completely slowly, heavily catches perfectly gently against his entirely warm, perfectly resting skin. It is an incredibly grounding, completely deep, heavy, highly physical, comforting texture. You can completely, safely, deeply perfect finality of this completely, deeply quiet, heavily, incredibly heavy, deeply profound, deeply profound resting place, Seth. The completely long, entirely noisy, incredibly violent, completely loud past is entirely, completely, absolute, entire, perfectly over. Everything exactly here is now perfectly safely, completely enveloped in a completely profound, entirely heavily silent, perfectly, beautifully, peaceful, perfectly, completely deeply, entirely dreamless sleep. The master of the Treasury gently wedges the heavy iron tip of his small pry bar beneath the rough lid of the massive pine crate. He pushes downward with a completely slow, steady, heavy weight. The ancient, thick forged iron slowly bites into the raw pine wood. It produces a low, deeply hollow groaning sound. The thick iron nails slowly give way with a heavy, dull scraping noise, perfectly echoing softly. In the completely cold stone vault, he carefully, completely safely lifts the heavy rough wooden lid up, and gently leans it entirely safely against the high completely dark heavy stone wall. Inside the completely rough wooden box, the heavy dark shadows completely gently cover a perfectly soft, entirely unexpected texture. The newly captured royal treasures are not thrown carelessly into the rough box. They are carefully, perfectly tightly wrapped in incredibly thick layers of deep crimson and heavy golden silk. The warm, gentle amber light from the small heavy brass lantern beautifully, slowly, completely washes over the completely smooth, rich woven fabric. The deep, rich, dark colours of the pure silk completely, gently, perfectly absorb, entirely softening the heavy, deep, dark cold light of the massive sleeping stone sleeping stone room. He completely, slowly, safely reaches his bare, weathered pine box. His long, quiet, steady fingers gently, deeply touch the perfectly smooth, completely soft, thick silk. The physical contrast is profoundly, completely, beautifully striking. The incredibly heavy, freezing, deep, raw, ancient stone fortress that surrounds the completely delicate, beautifully soft, spiff deeply, warm, heavy fabric. He entirely, completely, slowly begins to gently, smooth, thick silk from the heavy, solid, completely cold object, completely, safely resting hidden deep inside. As the heavy, perfectly smooth silk beautifully, gently across itself, it creates a profoundly, continuous rustling sound. Soft, continuous rustling sound. It is a completely gentle, incredibly low, perfectly muted swishing noise. A deeply, beautifully, completely soft, heavy whisper of ancient, pure, completely rich fabric, slowly shifting completely, entirely, peacefully in the dark. The sound perfectly, deeply, smoothly mirrors the incredibly, completely soft, entirely safe, deeply, verkep, a robe mer heavy, completely thick blanket, currently perfectly gently, completely safely wrapping your incredibly heavy, deeply tired, perfectly resting body. He pulls the completely soft, heavy, beautiful silk entirely, completely, slowly away, exposing the deeply, heavy, solid, completely cold, ancient object hidden, perfectly, deeply, within. The completely, beautifully, deeply soft, gentle sound perfectly, entirely, completely, naturally, gently pulls your tired, heavy, entirely, completely peaceful, deeply resting mind further down, perfectly, deeply, safely, entirely into a heavily, completely, beautifully dark, dreamless, incredibly safe, perfectly quiet, heavy sleep. The heavy woven silk falls away, completely revealing a grand royal chalice of the defeated Western court. The master of the Treasury wraps his weathered bare hands around the thick, wide base of the ancient goblet. The solid forged gold is incredibly cold, having entirely absorbed the deep freezing chill of the long winter journey across the dark mountains. He lifts the heavy, beautiful chalice slowly up into the warm amber light of the brass lantern. It is a deeply grounding physical mind, perfectly anchors his completely quiet, resting mind. The sheer immense mass of the solid gold requires a slow, perfectly steady grip, gently pulling his heavy shoulders slightly downward toward the earth. He holds the ancient drinking vessel entirely still in the quiet, completely silent stone room. His long, sensitive thumb slowly traces the incredibly intricate carvings etched deep into the thick golden surface. The unknown master craftsman of the distant kingdom spent countless long silent hours carefully shaping these complex twisting vines and delicate thick oak leaves. Now those incredibly loud chaotic days of grand royal feasts and vast noisy permanently gone are entirely permanently gone. Only the cold silent dense metal remains perfectly peacefully resting in the deep absolute dark of the treasury vault. The smooth completely polished gold feels flawlessly slick, completely unbroken beneath his dry, slow fingertips. As his resting hand slowly, naturally moves upward along the heavily curved bowl of the chalice, he encounters a profoundly different physical texture. Set heavily and deeply into the smooth, thick gold are several massive, unpolished gemstones. He touches a deeply rough raised ruby, perfectly safely embedded in the heavy cold metal. The surface of the raw jewel is intensely uneven, holding tiny microscopic ridges and completely flat, cold, natural facets. It is a beautiful, grounding contrast to the perfectly soft, smooth gold completely, bringing the heavy, tired mind into a deeply tactile, highly physical reality. He slowly, gently moves his finger from the smooth, slick, cold metal directly onto the coarse, heavy, ancient stone, and then slowly, completely, peacefully back again. The incredibly slow, continuous friction of his dry, warm skin against the cold, rough gemstone produces a beautiful, barely audible sound. It is a completely faint, deeply dry, rasping noise, a beautifully, heavily muted whisper that only exists because the massive stone fortress is so completely, profoundly, utterly silent tonight. You can easily, gently imagine the completely distinct, heavy, ancient textures safely resting directly against your own warm resting palm, the beautifully smooth, cold, heavy gold, and the deeply uneven, rough, heavy resting jewels. Your heavy, deeply tired body is perfectly, completely supported by the thick, warm mattress below you, while your quiet, safe mind, safely, slowly, cold, ancient treasures resting. The heavy, cold, ancient treasures resting perfectly peacefully in the dark. There is absolutely no heavy rush to move quickly on. We can simply, safely, completely, profoundly rest. Exactly right here, holding the heavy, silent, ancient gold softly in the warm, gentle, heavily flickering amber light. The master of the Treasury holds the heavy golden chalice perfectly steady before the warm amber flame of the small brass lantern. The single bright teardrop of fire burns slowly and peacefully in the completely draftless heavy vault. He gently shifts the thick, solid gold vessel, allowing the warm light to directly strike the massive embedded gemstones. The deep row of Ekep rubies and thick, uncut emeralds catch the fire instantly. They do not merely reflect their light back into the dark stone room. They completely absorb the flame, pulling the pure golden glow deep into their heavily dense, ancient crystalline cores. As the light passes completely through the heavy ancient jewels, it transforms into deep, magnificent colours. Long, slow beams of profound crimson red and heavy dark ocean green slowly shoot across the silent stone fortress. These deeply coloured beams of soft light gently strike the rough, pale, grey granite blocks of the high vaulted wall. The deep red and soft, dark green shadows slowly, beautifully dance against the cold, dry, ancient stone. It is a deeply mesmerizing, completely silent visual rhythm. The warm, soft flickering of the small oiled wick causes the deep, heavy coloured light to softly sway back and forth. A completely slow, gentle wash of deep ruby red entirely covers the heavy, ancient, cold stone. Then a beautifully peaceful shift brings the thick, heavy, dark emerald green perfectly sliding across the rough, heavily textured granite. The quiet dancing colours gently, entirely soothe the incredibly heavy, tired, resting eyes. The deep, rich crimson is the exact dark colour of a completely warm, heavy-setting winter sun gently fading over the distant dark sea. The deep, soft green perfectly matches the deeply quiet, safely ancient forest, completely perfectly hidden from the busy, noisy world. You can simply safely let your heavy, tired eyes watch the beautifully slow, gentle dancing light swaying safely in the deep, ancient dark. The incredibly thick, heavy, ancient stone walls safely hold the beautiful, warm colours inside, entirely keeping out the half-freezing night wind. The loud, demanding, waking world You are completely perfectly safe, resting entirely right here, beautifully softly enveloped in the warm, deeply coloured sleeping light of the heavily guarded, ancient royal treasury. The master of the treasury gently sets the heavy golden chalice back down into the completely soft silk lining of the rough pine crate. He completely slowly reaches his weathered hand deeper into the thick heavy wrappings and retrieves a incredibly heavy pouch crafted from entirely deep, dark black velvet. The exceptionally thick fabric completely absorbs the warm amber light, leaving it looking like a solid piece of the deep midnight shadow, safely resting directly in the palm of his steady hand. He slowly pulls the thin, soft leather string, holding the heavy pouch perfectly tightly closed. The dry, ancient leather gently, smoothly slides against the thick velvet, creating a beautifully muffledly tiny, soft scraping sound in the heavily silent vault. Walled. He completely safely tilts the small dark velvet pouch slowly over his wide, bare, completely warm palm. A single massive clear diamond slips completely silently out from the dark fabric and completely gently to rest perfectly safely against his soft, dry skin. This is the deeply grand, incredibly legendary pure stone of the fallen distant court. It is profoundly, incredibly heavy for its single small size, completely holding a deep, dense, heavy physical weight that perfectly smoothly grounds his completely quiet, deeply resting mind. The flat, ancient cut surface of the raw clear stone is completely flawlessly smooth and entirely deeply freezing cold to the completely quiet, slow touch. He perfectly safely, slowly, gently lifts his no hand, bringing the massive, incredibly clear, heavy stone close directly to the completely warm, gentle flame of the heavy brass lantern. The deeply thick, beautifully cut massive diamond does not completely simply reflect the warm golden fire outward. Instead, it completely entirely captures the warm, soft amber light, pulling it completely directly into its deeply complex, entirely cold, heavy crystal heart. The completely flawless, deeply perfect geometric facet, heavy mirrors endlessly tiny, perfectly bouncing the beautifully warm, soft golden flame entirely safely, completely deeply within the incredibly cold ancient stone. It completely safely, softly looks exactly like a completely tiny, perfectly smace, Squall's captive spotar incredibly heavy cage of deeply cold, incredibly bakaihi called ancient ice. As he perfectly's the heavy masses flow slowly, perfectly rotates the trapped warm golden light, gently, slowly, beautifully, safely shifts and deeply peacefully bends. There are absolutely no loud flashes and completely no sharp, entirely blinding rays anywhere in the dark room. It is completely simply a completely beautifully slow, heavy, intensely hypnotic, gentle, golden glowing. The completely ancient, completely silent, pure, heavy stone. Perfectly, completely gentle light, keeping it entirely perfectly protected from the freezing, deep, dark night. You can entirely perfectly safely let your incredibly smoothly, deeply sink directly into that tiny, completely warm, sleeping, heavily trapped, golden light. The master of the treasury perfectly safely returns the heavy sleeping diamond to its dark, soft velvet pouch. He completely slowly reaches his weathered hands deeper into the incredibly rough pine crate. A remarkably heavy long object wrapped safely in thick dark oiled leather. Raptees, the fee dark oiled leather. He slowly completely pulls back the heavy dark leather, perfectly exposing the massive hilt of a grand royal sword. The thick heavy handle is completely entirely encased in solid pure gold, deeply freezing cold to the quiet, deeply slow touch. He completely slowly beautifully draws the massive thick blade perfectly peacefully from its heavy wooden scabbard, the entirely cold metal sliding completely gently against the incredibly dry oiled wood, beautifully create entirely softy slow low, heavily muffled entirely soft whispering sound. The incredibly long heavy blade is perfectly forged from deeply ancient dark folded steel, in the entirely warm gentle amber light of the heavy brass lantern. The beautifully smooth surface of the freezing resembles the incredibly slow heavy ripples of a deeply quiet, dark river perfectly peacefully flowing slowly at midnight. This incredibly massive heavy weapon was deeply forged for entirely loud chaotic days of completely distant heavy conquests, but perfectly safely here directly inside the entirely dark, incredibly thick, heavy ancient stone fortress, all of its deeply lost, terrible, loud, waking, keen, worldly purpose. It is completely, absolutely, entirely, nothing more than a perfectly silent, solid object safely, gently, resting deeply, peacefully, in the completely absolute, heavy dark. The incredibly heavy, deeply freezing dark metal will absolutely never again completely strike heavily against another heavy cold shield. It will simply perfectly safely rest, right exactly here, soft, heavily warm, gentle, entirely soft, heavily sleeping reflection of the completely quiet amber lamp. You can perfectly safely let your completely tired mind entirely absorb this profoundly peaceful, completely absolutely deep, heavily quiet safety. The incredibly long, completely loud, deeply exhausting, entirely heavy battles of your completely waking day are perfectly, absolutely, completely, entirely, beautifully over. The master of the Treasury gently rests the heavy, dark steel blade perfectly safely back into its completely thick, dry wooden scabbard. He entirely peacefully lays the grand royal sword perfectly softly down, directly beside the heavy, pure golden chalice. He sits utterly still in the completely quiet, heavy stone room, simply looking his silent, cold, ancient wealth perfectly resting under the warm, gentle amber light. His completely slow, deeply heavy breathing perfectly measures the quiet, completely silent passings of the deeply dark night. He completely safely thinks deeply slowly about the heavily powerful distant kings who once completely proudly held these massive heavy objects. Those incredibly loud demanding men once perfectly heavily believed they completely owned the deep freezing metal. But the entirely heavy quiet truth of the ancient sleeping treasury is completely beautifully different. The loud heavily demanding kings have completely quietly perfectly passed entirely away. They are all completely safely perfectly gently resting deeply peacefully beneath the incredibly thick heavy cold earth. Their entirely long heavily noisy completely chaotic reigns are perfectly absolutely finished. But the heavy, completely cold, silent, pure gold and the completely dark, heavy steel entirely right here, completely untouched by the incredibly fast passings of ordinary human time. This completely deeply quiet, profound realization is perfectly heavily comforting. The deeply short, entirely fast, entirely busy waking world are absolutely entirely meaningless, down perfectly safely here in the heavily nightened, silent dark. You completely do not need to perfectly worry about absolutely anything at all tonight. You can perfectly, completely softly, gently let your own heavy, tired, deeply exhausted mind to the quiet, completely safe, heavy dark, completely perfectly resting in a deeply positively dreamless sleep. The master of the treasury completely slowly reaches out and perfectly safely grasps the heavy rough lid of the massive raw pine crate. He gently, entirely softly pulls the thick heavy wood back over the deeply silent ancient treasures. The The heavy forged iron nails completely perfectly slide back into their completely dark resting places with a deeply low, heavily muted groan. The completely safe, quiet, heavy wooden box is entirely perfectly, sealing the heavy cold gold and the deep freezing steel entirely away in the thick ancient dark. While he perfectly peacefully slowly turns his heavy tired body completely away from the deep dark corner. He picks up the completely heavy small brass lantern and entirely slowly safely walks back to the completely smooth, heavily waxed, dark oak desk. The beautifully, perfectly soft, completely quiet leather soles of his thick winter boots perfectly gently press against the deeply cold, heavy stone floor. Every single perfectly slow, gentle step completely heavily echoes of centuries safely trapped exactly here, inside this perfectly silent, heavily guarded, ancient stone fortress. He safely slowly sits completely down into the incredibly thick, heavy, dark crimson velvet chair. He perfectly gently rests his bare weathered hands directly on the completely smooth, dark ancient wood. He completely, perfectly, slowly, deeply breathes in the heavily dry, incredibly rich scent of the dark iron gall ink and the perfectly safe, warm, melting beeswax. He completely, gently, safely reaches for the perfectly finely shaped, deeply light goose quill once again. The completely heavy, quiet, perfectly safe night is entirely peacefully waiting for his completely slow, deeply heavy final writing. The perfectly cold, deeply sleeping raw silver and the entirely silent pure gold heavily safely rest directly in front of his tired, heavy eyes. You can perfectly, completely let the deeply quiet, heavy whispers of the ancient sleeping gently, perfectly safely carry your incredibly heavy, tired mind entirely perfectly downward into a deeply, beautifully absolute, heavily quiet sleep. The master of the Treasury completely slowly leans perfectly gently forward over the massive, wide, completely open, black leather ledger. He entirely safely aligns the thick, heavy, dry parchment perfectly straight beneath his tired, heavy eyes. The warm, gentle, soft amber light from the small, heavy brass lantern beautifully washes over the blank space, resting entirely ancient page. At the very bottom of the heavy ancient, he perfectly slowly dips the remarkably sharp, dry tip of the deeply light, finely shaped goose quill back entirely perfectly into the thick, heavy, dark green glass inkwell. The completely hollow, heavy keratin shaft perfectly gently enters the incredibly rich, heavy, viscous, dark, iron gall ink with that completely beautifully profound, deeply soft, wet sound. He completely slowly, perfectly draws the heavy, dark, wet feather directly upwards safely into the heavily dry, warm, ancient vault air. A single completely tiny, perfectly dark, heavy drop of directly falls entirely silently back directly into the small, dark, heavy pool. Dark lies glassed pulsool. He completely, entirely, softly presses the deeply sharp tip, put perfectly gently down against the completely rough, heavily thick, incredibly dry ancient parchment. The perfectly, beautifully crisp, completely, deeply dry scratching sound immediately, perfectly returns entirely filling the completely heavy, silent ancient stone room. Wiggle, a perfectly slow, heavy, sweeping curve. A completely deeply gentle, perfectly safe, heavy pause. A completely slow, incredibly steady, profoundly downward, heavy stroke. The completely magnificent, heavy golden chalice. The incredibly flawless, heavy, dark folded steel, massive, clear diamond, and the entirely royal sword of the grand royal sword are all perfectly, entirely reduced completely perfectly down to incredibly thin, flat, completely dark, graceful, heavy lines. The completely heavy, silent physical reality of the vast safely translated entirely directly into completely beautiful, deeply secret, heavy, dark court script. His entirely heavy, deeply tired matches the perfectly beautifully slow, deeply gentle, heavy rhythm of his resting writing hand. Inhale completely perfectly deeply as the perfectly light quiet feather gracefully slowly lifts entirely away. Exhale completely heavily entirely softly as the deeply sharp tip safely gently beautifully presses completely down. You can perfectly safely completely peacefully let your own incredibly heavy, deeply tired resting chest perfectly slowly and completely heavily fall. Completely gently. The master of the Treasury calmly watches the thick, dark, wet ink slowly dry against the rough ancient parchment. The warm amber light from the heavy brass lantern beautifully washes over the freshly written words. As the completely rich, viscous iron gall liquid slowly loses its wetness, it gracefully transforms right before his resting eyes. The sharp vercepete dark gleam gently fades away, becoming a profoundly beautiful, flat matte black. The incredibly heavy, freezing physical weight of the silent, pure gold, the raw silver and the folded dark steel has all been perfectly captured inside these thin, quiet resting lines. He takes a perfectly slow, deep breath, completely filling his chest with the dry, ancient vault air. He completely gently lowers the finely shaped goose quill onto the perfectly smooth, waxed dark oak desk. The soft, hollow keratin shaft touches the deep, solid wood with a completely muffled, beautifully quiet tap. This incredibly soft single sound perfectly marks the entirely peaceful end of his heavy, silent midnight duty. There is absolutely nothing more for his careful hands to do. He reaches his weathered, steady hands forward to grasp the remarkably heavy, thick covers. He perfectly, carefully, slowly, and carefully folds the massive book closed. The huge, incredibly heavy dark covers meet exactly in the center with an incredibly deep, profound, totally heavy resonant thud. This beautifully low, heavy echoing sound perfectly gently travels deep into the absolutely silent dark. It softly bounces against the towering stone walls, perfectly signaling the complete and total end of the long ancient journey. The vast royal wealth is entirely secured. The loud, demanding world is perfectly locked away above. You can safely let the heavy, quiet echo gently pull your deeply tired, peacefully resting mind perfectly downward into a completely safe, absolutely dreamless sleep. The heavy thud of the closing ledger completely settles into the deep silence of the ancient stone fortress. The master of the Treasury leaves his verkep, a rumor weathered hand resting flat against the black leather for a long, peaceful. The work of the night is finally done. The gold, the raw silver, the diamonds, and the heavy dark steel are all safely accounted for, locked securely away from the loud and demanding world above. He slowly pushes back the heavy crimson velvet chair. The thick wooden legs dare row agur with a low, grounding friction against the cold stone floor. He stands up with a slow, deliberate grace, perfectly entirely unhurried. He reaches out and gently picks up the small brass lantern from the dark oak desk. The soft golden flame flickers gently inside its glass housing, casting long, peaceful shadows that stretch across the vast, sleeping vault. With slow, measured steps, he turns away from the desk and begins to walk toward the massive iron door at the far end of the deep corridor, the incredibly soft leather soles of his winter boots against the ancient marble paving stones. Step, pause, step, pause. It is a deeply heavy, rhythmic cadence that beautifully echoes the slow, resting heartbeat of the heavy stone mountain. As he walks slowly toward the exit, he reaches out with his free hand and turns the small brass dials on the side of the lantern. The wick slowly begins to lower back into the heavy oil. The warm amber pool of light gently shrinks, pulling closer and closer to the heavy brass frame. The shadows of the deep vault stretch longer, softly swallowing the towering stacks of pine crates and the heavy iron-bound chests in a blanket of absolute peace. He takes one final deep breath of the incredibly dry, cold ancient air. The sharp scent of iron gall ink and cold metal fades behind him. The heavy darkness gracefully overtakes the room, a profoundly safe, deep, and comforting blackness. There is nothing left to worry, and absolutely nothing left to worry about. You are perfectly safe, perfectly held, and completely free to let the heavy, quiet dark pull you down into a deep, unbroken, and beautiful sleep. The master reaches the massive iron door. He stops, his hand resting on the heavy, cold metal ring. There is no urgency in his movement. The heavy door, forged centuries ago, is immovable and perfectly secure. He turns the iron handle, and the heavy hinges, oiled with thick, fragrant fats, move vecebite at a low, deep hum that is felt more through the stone floor than heard by the ear. It is a slow, grounding vibration that resonates deep within his tired bones. He steps out of the treasury and into the narrow, winding stone passage that leads upward toward the palace quarters. The air here is different, sharper, thinner, and carries the faint, cool scent of damp earth and deep, undisturbed history. The lantern S light is now just a tiny pulsating ember, yet it is enough to guide his familiar, steady steps through the absolute dark. He does not need to look at the ground. He knows every stone, every uneven curve, and every cooling draught of this ancient subterranean path. Behind him the heavy door swings closed vacapite heart, a final booming resonance that swallows the last hint of the Treasury's warmth. The sound is final. A total seal on the long, busy night. He does not look back. He knows the gold, the silver, and the steel are exactly where they should be, silently, resting in the cold, deep dark. His duty is fully satisfied, and his responsibility has vanished into the thick, quiet air of the mountainside. He begins the long, slow climb toward the upper chambers. The ascent is steady and rhythmic. His breathing is perfectly matched to the steady rise and fall of the stone stairs, his pace unchanging and profoundly calm. He is untethered from the world of commerce and kingly burdens. With every step, he leaves behind the heavy weight of the treasury, letting it dissolve into the quiet depths he just left. You are perfectly in etnologie with him. The heavy rhythmic climb, the cool still air, and the absolute absence of noise. Every step he takes upward is a step deeper into your own heavy, beautiful, and completely undisturbed sleep. The master of the treasury reaches the top of winding staircase. He emerges into a wide, vaulted antechamber where the air is still and cool, scented with the faint, lingering wax candles from the long hours of the evening. The faint amber glow of the lantern in his hand casts long, dancing shadows against the tapestries that hang heavy and silent against the walls. Here the world is hushed, a profound transition between the deep subterranean vault and the sleeping palace above. He walks toward the heavy oak door of his own sleeping quarters. His movements are increasingly slow, each motion a deliberate surrender to the exhaustion that has been waiting for him. He reaches the door and presses his palm against the rough, cool wood. It is a quiet, familiar feeling. The boundary between his long, structured duty and the absolute, personal peace of rest. He pushes the door open, the heavy hinges silent, and steps into the sanctuary of his small, dimly lit room. The space is simple and profoundly quiet. A thick, fur-lined wool blanket is draped neatly over the bed, waiting. He sets the brass lantern down on a small side table, the flame now so low it is merely a tiny, comforting bead of light. He unfastens the heavy woolen cloak from his shoulders, and it falls to the floor with a soft, dull sound. He is finally shedding the weight of the day, layer by layer, movement by movement. He sits on the edge of the bed, feeling the firm, supportive surface beneath him. The silence of the blanket of calm that wraps around the entire Stosen's structure, scone-treed. There is no wind here, no echoes of the vault, only the soft, rhythmic sound of his own breathing, which is becoming increasingly deep and slow. He lies back, his head sinking into the cool, soft linen pillow. His heavy eyelids close, shutting out the last faint flicker of the lantern. You are right there, Vekepite at him, sinking into the same deep, soft comfort, feeling the tension of the day dissolve into the quiet, dark, and perfectly beautiful stillness of the long night. The master of the Treasury lies perfectly still in the absolute, velvety dark. The room is so quiet that he can hear the rhythmic, distant beating of his own heart, a slow, steady pulse that mirrors the profound stillness of the entire fortress. The exhaustion that once felt like a heavy, demanding weight has now transformed into a gentle, flowing warmth, spreading, softening every muscle, and quieting every last, lingering thought of the ledger or the gold. He feels the weight of the thick wool blanket pressing softly against his chest, a comforting, tactile boundary that seals him away from the waking world. He does not need to move. He does not need to think. The duty is finished. The books are closed. The cold, raw treasures are safely entombed in the mountain. And for the first time in many hours, his mind is as still as the deep, ancient stone that surrounds him. There is no tomorrow yet, no yesterday, only the perfect unfolding present of this deep, dreamless rest. A cool, soft draught moves through the room, carrying the scent of the distant midnight forest, clean and sharp, contrasting perfectly with his sanctuary, to indoor warmth of the He breathes it in, a long, slow inhalation that expands his lungs, followed by a long, relaxed exhalation that carries away the very last traces of the day's intensity. With each breath, he sinks deeper into the mattress, feeling as though the bed itself is slowly, gently cradling him, lifting the weight of gravity, until he feels tired and entirely suspended in the dark. Your own breathing has become perfectly aligned with his. The deep, heavy rhythm is identical, a slow, natural, and entirely effortless flow. The silence is not empty. It is full, thick, and profoundly protective, a tangible presence that holds you completely safe. Every sensation, the coolness of the pillow, the warmth of the blankets, the absolute absence of any need to do, to speak, or to be, is a signal to your mind that the time for effort is over. You are drifting, entirely unmoored, flowing smoothly down into a beautiful infinite sea of quiet. Let yourself go completely into this heavy, dark, and perfectly peaceful sleep. The deep silence of the room begins to pulse with a gentle hypnotic rhythm. It is the sound of absolute stillness, a profound hum that exists only when the world is completely at rest. The master of the Treasury is no longer conscious of the stone walls, the palace, or even the passage of time. His mind has become as calm and expansive as the deep, dark night sky over the mountains. The heavy, lingering images of the Treasury, the glint of gold, the cold steel, the rough pine have all dissolved, replaced by a soft, uniform darkness that is both light and comforting. His body feels entirely heavy, every remaining point of tension in his shoulders, his neck, and his tired hands has been fully released. He is sinking, not with any sense of falling, but with the smooth, inevitable motion of a leaf drifting slowly down onto a perfectly still, deep mountain lake. The surface of the water is cool, dark, and utterly peaceful. He is welcomed into that quiet depth, letting the warmth of his own body merge with the profound coolness of the night. Outside, the wind has completely ceased. The world is held in a state of suspended animation, a perfect pause in the story of the centuries. There is no tomorrow pulling at his thoughts. There is only the beautiful, endless now of his resting state. The Master S breathing is now almost imperceptible, a faint rhythmic tide that ebbs and flows in complete harmony with the silence. He is entirely at peace, his long, arduous duty fully reconciled, his spirit resting in the heart of the ancient mountain. You are floating with him in this serene, limitless space. The boundary between your own awareness and this deep, quiet dark has faded away. There is no longer any separation between the comfort of the blankets, the stillness of the room, and the deepening, heavy sensation of your own descent into sleep. You are drifting further into the vast protective embrace of the night. Everything cotes, everything is still. Everything is completely, perfectly, beautifully at rest. Allow yourself to be entirely carried by this heavy, gentle flow, deeper and deeper, until there is nothing left but the calm, dark, and dreamless silence. The Master of the Treasury has fully transitioned into the deepest, most quiet phase of the night. His consciousness, once sharp and analytical, has softened into a state of pure, expansive calm. There is no longer a sense of mort or he or duty. There is only the sensation of existence, a slow rhythmic unfolding that requires no effort, no thought, and no direction. The ancient stone walls of the fortress, which once seemed so thick and impenetrable, now feel like a gentle, protective shell, holding him in a space that is entirely removed from the rest of the world. The darkness in the room is soft, almost tangible. It wraps around him like a shroud of pure peace, insulating him from every memory of the day. The weight of the gold, the sharp lines of the ledger, and the cold touch of the steel are gone, washed away by the tide of profound exhaustion. He is simply resting, a small, quiet presence within the heart of the great still mountain. The heartbeat of the fortress itself seems to be the only thing that remains, a low, tectonic thrum that reinforces the safety and the finality of this moment. As he descends deeper into this state, his senses detach from the physical surroundings. The cool touch of the linen, the warmth, the scent of the dry air. All of these sensations begin to blur and merge into a single cohesive experience of comfort. He is entirely one with the silence. It is a state of total, absolute surrender, where the mind is finally allowed to be entirely vacant. Free from the burdens of history, commerce, or time, he is perfectly, beautifully, and completely at peace. You are drifting exactly where he is, flowing into the same vast, quiet ocean of dark. The distance between your own wakefulness and this profound, heavy sleep has vanished. The weight of your own body is no longer a burden, but a gentle anchor holding you securely in this space of perfect rest. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to define, and nothing left to expect. You are simply sinking into the quiet, into the dark, and into the absolute, perfect stillness of the long, dreamless night. Everything is silent, everything is settled, everything is beautifully, endlessly, and completely at rest. The deep, heavy stillness of the fortress is absolute. The Master of the Treasury is now fully submerged in the profound depths of the long night. His breathing is no longer a conscious effort. It is a slow, rhythmic tide that ebbs and flows in perfect alignment with the ancient, immovable heart of the mountain itself. There is no longer any distinction outside and the warm, quiet space within. All has become one singular, unbroken fabric of serene velvet darkness. The memories of the day, the heavy clinking gold, the sharp scratching quill, the complex winding corridors, have all dissolved into a mist of peaceful, formless static. He is drifting in a space that is entirely beyond the reach of duty or memory. It is a place of total, absolute restoration. The heavy protective silence of the vault has followed him here, acting as a final, sealing layer of tranquility that keeps the waking world at an impossible distance. Every muscle in his body is completely surrendered, heavy and limp, sinking deep into the firm comfort of the bed. The weight of his own existence has lightened until it feels like nothing more than a soft, lingering shadow in the dark. There is no urgency, so there is no tomorrow rising yet on the horizon. There is only this perfect, suspended point in time, a quiet, infinite threshold where everything is settled and everything is completely at rest. Met completely. You are floating perfectly in this same quiet space. The heavy, dark embrace of the night is absolute, a soothing, boundless presence that asks nothing of you but to simply exist. Feel the steady, grounding thrum of the mountain beneath you, a constant, quiet assurance of safety. The silence is your sanctuary. The dark is your soft, protective blanket. You are drifting ever downward, deeper into the beautiful velvet abyss, where the world is quiet, your mind undistill, and your sleep is absolute, deep, and perfectly undisturbed. The master of the Treasury exists now in the most quiet centre of the mountain. All movement has stopped. His mind is a vast, empty chamber, perfectly cool and profoundly. The long, intricate journey through the vaults, the weight of the royal treasures, and the precise, careful work of the evening are all entirely forgotten. The scale, they have been neatly folded away, left behind in the deep, unmoving dark of the lower levels. There is only the current, steady pulse of his own deep sleep. Outside the heavy stone walls, the world continues its slow, turning cycle, but it cannot touch this space. The palace is hushed, the mountain is silent, and the night has reached its deepest, most peaceful hour. The air in the chamber feels light, crystalline sarn, and perfectly still. It is a vacuum of noise, an absolute absence of any vibration or demand. His body is a quiet vessel, completely at ease, perfectly supported by the darkness that surrounds him on every side. The transistor is a phantom of calm, drifting through the architecture of the deep night. There are no dreams, no fleeting, the napes images of the par, no anticipation of the dawn. There is only the steady hypnotic rhythm of a mind that has been completely, perfectly unburdened. Every breath is a quiet affirmation of his total release from the duties of the world. He is entirely at peace, anchored in the deepest, safest, and most perfect solitude. You are held within this same beautiful suspension. The heavy, dark tranquility has moved from his space into yours. Feel how effortlessly your body sinks, how naturally your mind lets go of every last thin thread of conscious thought. The quiet is absolute. The safety is total. You are being carried gently down by the gravity of this profound, heavy sleep. There is nothing left to do. There is nothing left to hold. Simply settle into the dark, breathe with the mountain, and let yourself fall completely, blissfully, and endlessly into the deep, dreamless silence. The heavy, ancient stone fortress is now perfectly still. The master of the Treasury has reached the final, deepest point of his rest, a place where time and memory have entirely ceased to exist. There is no sound in the chamber, no movement in the halls, and no flicker of light remaining in the deep, velvet dark. The entire mountain has become a silent, protective tomb for the days-long labours, holding the quiet within its immense, cold embrace. Everything that needed to be accounted for is locked away. Every weight that needed to be carried has been set down. Some for the heavy gold, the sharp steel, and the complex records of the day are nothing more than dust and shadow, swallowed completely by the absolute peace of the midnight hour. The Master S body, heavy and deeply relaxed, is perfectly surrendered to the mattress, sinking into a profound stillness that mirrors the quiet of the earth itself. The night is infinite, a vast and beautifully dark sea that stretches out in every direction. There is no horizon, no dawn, and no return to the noisy waking world. The silence is complete, a total unwavering presence that wraps around your own consciousness, cooling your mind in this state of absolute and anchoring you firmly in the state of dreamless tranquility. The story is closed, the vault is sealed, the heavy, quiet dark is total. You are held safe and completely at peace within the deep, silent heart of the mountain. All that remains is the perfect, velvet void of sleep. Everything is finished. Everything is settled. Everything is beautifully, endlessly, and completely at rest. This is a work of creative historical narrative, constructed solely for entertainment, relaxation, and educational purposes. While rooted in verified archives, certain scenes and atmospheres have been textually reimagined to provide an immersive auditory experience. This content was developed with the assistance of advanced AI tools and has been meticulously reviewed, verified, and edited by the editorial team at Whispers of Sentries. All rights reserved. Until next time, listen closely to the whispers of the past, because you never know what timeless wisdom might quietly find its way into your night.